Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the March 14th meeting of the Granville Exempted Village District Board of Education. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Take the roll, please.
Dr. Cornman.
Here.
Mr. Janice.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Cohen.
Here. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. We have our commendations tonight, and I think this is rare. I think it's all teachers, so that's good. But representatives from the Licking County Foundation surprised 2 teachers at GHS this year as recipients of the Tibby Leslie Travel Grant. English and Social Studies teacher Dana Decker plans to travel this summer to Paris, Venice, Vienna, and then a night spent in Slovenia. So that should be interesting. We're looking forward to hearing when you return about your experience. And then CTEC Visual Communications teacher Jennifer Kinsley plans to travel to Wales. So the Tibby Leslie travel grant is for teachers to apply, and the whole notion is that when you travel abroad, you gain insight into the rest of the world and what they're doing and how they're doing it, and you can bring it back and apply that knowledge to your classroom and your teaching. So we want to recognize Dana Decker. Come on up, Dana. And we appreciate you submitting your grant. We look forward, when you return, to hear a little bit of a presentation about your travels.
Sure.
Okay? Congratulations. So, picture. I know.
It's all.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Okay. We also tonight are recognizing teachers awarded the Master Teacher status during the 2016-17 school year. Those renewing their status for 5 years are Keith Mullins, Amy Tolberg from GHS, Lisa Stankunas and Lisa Smith from GES, Brandon Mesner from GIS, and Pam Bice from GMS. A new master teacher this year is Jess Wilson from GES. Congratulations to all of our master teachers. Now, I have to say, Keith was just jealous because his wife got the award last board meeting, and he felt bad, and so he quickly got his master teacher information back in for his renewal. But all the rest of them were very dedicated. So all our master teachers come on up. All right, now everyone's
Gosh, when the kids are here, there's all flashbulbs.
I know. Just so you're aware, master teacher is not something that we give out just to anyone. There's a process that Mr. Burnett administers, and they have to submit documentation, kind of a portfolio of information to demonstrate their competency as a master teacher. It's something that the state of Ohio recognizes as well, and I think it is an indication of our profession that we continuously grow and improve and try and do what we can to make our learning relevant to students across K-12. So I really do applaud all of our teachers who have have gone through this process and took it seriously. So thank you. Okay, that concludes my commendations. At this point, I usually say you can leave if you want, the board's going to conduct their, but you know, I technically could make, no, I'm just kidding. Get out of here. Thank you very much for coming. All right. I do not see Simon. Matt, is he planning on? Okay, all right. So we will skip to staff reports. I get to get back up and talk a little bit about the Every Student Succeeds Act. All right, so I'm actually going to kind of go through this, and yes, our bulb is still hinky, but most of it is white and red. So the Every Student Succeeds Act is a piece of federal legislation that was passed a couple months ago, and I want to talk a little bit about its history and its development over time, because I think it's critical for the next 5 to 10 years in public education in the state of Ohio. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm concerned about as a local board and as a local governance team, and then maybe some opportunities to make some real changes. But the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was first passed in 1965, and it emphasized equal access to, for education for all children. ESEA in Ohio, in 2012, our state applied for and got a waiver to look at an alternative to AYP, which was the annual yearly progress for all of our subgroups. It provided a little bit more flexibility with regard to the use of federal funds. Most of the federal funds come in the form of Title I, Title II, and Title III. Title I is for economically disadvantaged students. Title II is around professional development funds, and Title III is students that are limited English proficient. The identification of priority, focus, and watch schools, that is for people that are in either academic or fiscal emergency or have some type of concern related to their academic performance. Membership in multi-state assessment consortia, that's going back to the development of the new Ohio Learning Standards and the Common Core prior to that, and then college and career readiness standards. So all those things were in our previous iteration of federal legislation. The Every Student Succeeds Act reauthorizes the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to create long-term, stable federal policy that gives states additional flexibility and encourages innovation, while at the same time holding us accountable for results. So there is a little bit more wiggle room, and we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about that, but yet it's still a requirement for an accountability plan and an assessment system within the state of Ohio. So for those of us that were hoping for a lot of latitude with this new federal legislation, it still is a pretty tight box, but there are some opportunities for some pilots that I'll get into in a little bit. I want you to know, so I was at the State Standards Board presentation Monday. Colleen Grady, who's a policy specialist at ODE, gave this PDF. It's not widely available right now. It's not even on the website, but this was her March presentation to the Standards Board. So this is kind of what they know at this time. The standards. Every Student Succeed Act reinforces the state's authority over standards, accountability, and other key policies. So again, the notion of there being federal oversight really is an abdication of responsibility back to the states, because the states actually own the responsibility of providing an educational system for the youth in Ohio. It prohibits any U.S. Secretary of Education from requiring state tests and to adopt specific standards and assessments. That is specifically written in there because of last year. Again, this was a bipartisan piece of legislation coming out of Washington, D.C., and there was a lot of emphasis on making sure that the federal government is not dictating to the locals or to the local states what type of standards or assessments are given. You can feel free to ask me questions as I go along, because some of you are smiling. But the law does require that state standards are aligned with college and career skills, which is a component of our college readiness provisions. Assessments. So there was hope that we would have a lot of flexibility in using our local assessments to drive the accountability system for our local, we call them LEAs, local educational agencies. But in the federal legislation, there is a requirement for us to continue to provide student academic assessments in reading and mathematics in grades 3 through 8, and then once during high school, and science assessments in designated grade bands. So they do not require social studies assessments, but there is kind of an underlying tone that there needs to be more grade-specific or course-specific assessments at the high school level, which would include history or social studies, whichever you want to call it. Now, it does say that states are allowed to use nationally recognized high school academic assessments in lieu of state assessments, as long as those assessments are aligned to the state standards and meet other requirements. So that is some flexibility that we may choose to take advantage of. So the Board of Education has been getting updates for the past, 7 or 8 years, Mr. Burnett, about the ACT end of course exams, the quality core exams that were aligned with the ACT standards. We've been giving them for many years. We now could use those end of course exams as our criteria for the graduation requirements and or the state assessments in those grade bands. So that's an opportunity for us to potentially eliminate other assessments that we don't value as much and just give the ACT quality core and of course exams in place.
So the federal government has given some latitude to the states. Has Ohio decided as a state what latitude it gives to the districts, or are we in there?
So this is part of our advocacy.
Okay.
So when Colleen Grady was speaking on Monday night, I was raising my hand and saying, okay, they're giving us flexibility to do this. Is Ohio going to take advantage of that flexibility? And her answer was a resounding, I don't know yet. So they are now getting the federal guidelines that are associated with all these broader policy concepts, and they're trying to determine practical application. So that's why our advocacy is so important. So a theme that you're going to hear throughout my presentation is that advocacy matters right now. We have a window of time that is provided with this reauthorization to recreate and provide some creative solutions within the sandbox that we're playing. And I think that's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to advocate on behalf of the students of Granville, but also all the students in Ohio.
Just real quickly, do they talk about how it's going to apply? Again, like, current freshmen have already been under 3 different regimes of, guidelines and standards and things like that. So do they talk at all about?
They have not talked about timelines. What is going to happen is in the 17-18 school year, they are going to have to start whatever assessment system they choose. We have all of 16-17 to develop and start to implement that new assessment system. So, but 17-18, it has to be implemented. So we have a little bit of time, but a year and a half is not a lot of time to do the type of things that we're talking about here. But for us, we could do this almost immediately.
Right.
that provision
But
specifically.
then, would it apply, but there's no timeline, so.
Yeah.
Again, apply to anybody who's already started high school, or would it be
We would have to make that decision locally.
locally, okay?
Yeah. Okay. The states may use computer adaptive assessments and may measure student academic proficiency above and below grade level and use such scores in the state accountability system. So one of the things that we advocated for prior to the park assessments was, or during the park assessment debacle, was the ability to use NWA MAP assessments as a measure of performance to a standard. Because it is nationally normed and it has some level of criterion for grade levels to adhere to, but it is adaptive. So it goes below and above the grade level standard, which is exactly what you would want. It has more stretch. So psychometricians look at how much stress or stretch does an assessment have. If I'm testing third grade, does it go to fourth grade standards, or can it go to fourth grade standards, and does it cover second grade? So can a student demonstrate above grade level competence? That's exactly what NWA MAP does currently. And we do implement that in 3 through 8 in reading and 3 through 6 in mathematics, or yes, 3 through 6 in mathematics. And it does not require, but it does set limits on the amount of time devoted to assessments. So that is another area of advocacy. The problem is that there is still a requirement in another section of the guidelines that requires whatever the assessment is to be unilaterally applied. So if we were going to pick NWA MAP, every district in the state of Ohio would have to use NWA MAP. Yes.
And that's that's part of the federal.
That's part of the federal legislation. They're trying to get additional guidance on that, but they do not want, because you'll see in the next couple of slides, they have to be able to meaningfully differentiate between school districts, and they don't want necessarily multiple measures needing concordance tables and comparability documents, but I'll get into that in a minute. So each statewide system must meaningfully differentiate schools using at least academic proficiency on the state assessment, so that means it has to be a one-size-fits-all decision. Graduation rates for high school, English language proficiency, growth or another statewide academic indicator for K-8 schools. So that is a requirement of the accountability system. So growth is embedded into this. So we always look at performance and growth. It is still part of the same assessment system. Not less than one other state non-academic indicator of school quality on student success. So much like we have our whole child benchmarks, they're saying we want you to have a whole child measure of success. The problem is they identify like truancy rates as non-academic. Well, truancy isn't an issue for Granville, but there is some flexibility there. But what I would suggest is, look at our benchmarks. The average rate of participation in extracurriculars. It's protective factors, and kids tend to do better academically when they're actively involved in extracurricular activities. And then 95% assessment participation rate benchmark. So this matters because of the whole opt-out. The federal government said you must have 95% of your students taking the assessments in these grade levels. Now, the state is going to have to interpret that. Last year, the state said there is no such thing as opt-out, but you can allow it, which kind of got us into a nice little quagmire because they kind of pushed it back on the locals, and the locals didn't have anything to say, hey, we can't do this. So there is still a federal requirement that requires assessment participation at 95%. So where might that impact you? If you drop below 95%, you will put your Title I, Title II, and Title III dollars at risk. They did not put those funds at risk last year, but they have clearly stated in this policy that if you fall below that through opt-outs, your federal funding is at risk.
What do you think the participation rate was last year for the state of Ohio?
It was still 98%.
Okay.
The opt-outs, it really was where it hit.
Yeah.
There were some school districts that had almost 30 or 40% of their student body opt out. Other school districts, we had close to like 4 or 5%.
Okay.
So it really was depending on where you were. This is, so I can be a little snarky in some of my meetings with some people, but it says school improvement, states must use evidence-based interventions. And I said, I think that's highly ironic because we have known for the last 10 to 15 years that the accountability system does not actually improve any performance at any level within the state. It's a failed, catalyst for improvement. And yet there's no evidence base to suggest that the accountability system is improving anything. The same school districts that struggled 10 to 15 years ago struggle now. We just admire the problem even more. So this is ironic to me. Now, there's a little bit of hesitation that I see in this area. First of all, we'll never, knock on wood, see school improvement because you really have to be demonstrating poor performance on those state assessment systems. But it really limits what evidence-based interventions you can apply for and use, which if you know anything about educational research, there's usually point, counterpoint for any strategy that you try to implement. So specific school improvement models are no longer required. They used to tell you exactly what you had to do. Now they use the term evidence-based, and you get to decide. I'm not going to go too much into this about what we do from targeted support and school-wide. It really relates to how we use Title I funds for the lowest 5% of the student population. But in Granville, we use our Title I funds to support reading intervention teachers at the teacher at the elementary, and I think we use some of that revenue to cover school psychologists. No, not anymore.
That's all IDEA.
Okay, excellent. So there is still requirements for that. Teacher and leader quality. ESSA does not require specific educator evaluation measures or methods, but the law does allow, but does not require states to use Title II funds to implement teacher evaluations. So this is all, ODE gets a lot of money through Title II to implement the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. Now, they can use that money in a variety of different ways that fall under the guise of teacher evaluation. And so they've had a lot of latitude over the years. This kind of gives them even more latitude. But again, they can use Part A to attract, prepare, support, and retain effective teachers and leaders serving in high poverty and minority student areas. The goal, one of the goals of ESSA is to apply more resources to targeted areas that are highly economically disadvantaged and low performance. So I agree with that piece. What I don't like is the one-size-fits-all policy impacts how we govern Granville exempted village schools in the same way that it does Cleveland Metropolitan. And I think they should be different. And then the law reauthorizes the TIF fund, which is a competitive grant to support innovative educator evaluation systems. Those are in place across southern Ohio. It's more of a pay for performance or a merit pay structure. It reauthorizes that TIF fund. It also allows for some of the areas that they call teacher and leader quality. You can read that, but I think one of the main things that it is trying to achieve is right here. Require implementations of state equity plans to ensure poor and minority students have equitable access to effective teachers. One of their flawed methodologies or flawed thinking is that in large urban areas, it's the quality of the teacher that is leading to poor performance. And that's not the case. It's a social issue. It's a fabric issue. It's wraparound service issues. And so they're trying to say, we want to have the highest quality teachers teaching in the areas that have the highest number of poor minority students. And in a lot of situations where you look at that, you can actually see very high quality teachers doing very good things, but they don't necessarily close the gap on the state standards because kids come in not having access to print-rich environments. So they're trying to close the gap, and the gap's already significantly wider than it is for students coming in Granville. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Transition timeline. They're engaging stakeholders, and what I will tell you is that stakeholder engagement at this point in time has been very strategic, not tactical. So there are 4 departments within ODE that will be given a scope of work related to a provision of ESSA. That group is then supposed to develop the business rules, the scope, or clearly define the guidelines for each area. And my advocacy was, listen, I understand you're engaging stakeholders, but all you're doing is giving an overview of ESSA. That's not engagement. We need to be there at the tactical level when you're actually creating the systems, because that's where you need to hear from the field. Because if you don't hear from the field, you have a bunch of people. Is anyone from ODE here? Okay, they may be listening online. But that's where you have a lot of people that have not been in the field for 5, 10, 20 years in some situations. And you need to have the field's influence on some of those practical business rules and guidance documents. So that's what we're trying to advocate for. In August of 2016, some of the flexibility waivers will expire. And they haven't really determined what they're going to do with that, but I think the federal government has kind of indicated that, you know, really starting in 2016, you have almost a gap year, a year and a half to fix and develop a new plan. Transition period to work with stakeholders to develop state plans, 16, 17, and then we have to have the plans in place for compliance going into 17, 18. Key decision points. Adaptive testing. So these are the things that they have to actually develop some guidelines and guidance around. Assessments. Adaptive testing, nationally recognized high school assessments, innovative pilot. Now that I want to talk about, because that might be something that I bring to you as a governance board to really pursue. So written into the federal legislation is a notion called competency-based accountability. Competency-based is more qualitative than quantitative. So you can look at competencies like, for example, the Asia Society's global leaders or global scholars competencies. It's a rubric of competencies that we expect all of our global scholars to attain in some way. And they do that through a variety of activities, and then they're judged by a panel of experts or their teachers around those competencies, and they're either deemed to have obtained those competencies or not. There is some wiggle room to create an innovative competency-based assessment system that would qualify as our state accountability plan. It would look very different than what is currently in place. But with project-based learning being an initiative for the next 3 to 5 years, and us talking about retooling our board benchmarks, that might be an opportunity for us to really dig into what do we want our students to be able to know and be able to do and demonstrate competency in as they leave us after 12th grade.
And that would be instead of or in addition to the statewide
It would be
standard
instead
testing?
of.
Great.
So we could
And that
say,
latitude is in the federal legislation?
Yes.
Okay.
and so what would happen is we would have to apply for that innovative competency-based assessment pilot, apply, show our plan, and they would have to say yay or nay. And my plan would include the adaptive assessment. It would include competency badges that we think are important for our students K through 12.
But then the entire state would have to adopt it.
No,
No.
this
So
is,
this
this
is-
can be an individual district.
So that statewide thing only applies to the standardized
Yes,
tests.
for the typical accountability plan. This is called a pilot.
No, I
So-
mean, but like once, it's a pilot.
Yeah,
But then if we were to be able to continue with it, because a pilot is usually a short-term thing.
Yes.
Then the whole state would have to adopt it, no? Or we could
I
continue?
don't know the answer to that, but I would assume that if, the pilot in this case would have to be a 3 to 5 year pilot.
Okay.
Because they will not grant you a 1-year pilot. And many of the school districts that applied for some type of waiver in the last round, it's been in place for almost 4 or 5 years. So there is some flexibility
So
there.
school districts in Ohio have done this in the past?
Yellow Springs has done this,
Okay. And they had something along the same lines with more qualitative assessments
Yes.
or?
very much so.
Great.
And they actually didn't petition the state of Ohio, they petitioned the federal government. And the federal government gave them waivers over ODE. So it's an interesting little path. Accountability, the non-academic report card measure, enhanced ELL accountability and support group accountability. Interestingly enough, the federal legislation, now we have to document students that are coming from a military family, foster children, and homeless children, much more specifically like within our subgroup populations that we already look at. So there is an emphasis on expanding those subgroup populations. Educator effectiveness, again, revisions to the state equity plan. They are eliminating highly qualified teachers, which is what we have to demonstrate that teachers are within field teaching those courses. So there's a whole booklet that says these are the licensure requirements for these courses, and you have to have alignment, and it's called highly qualified teacher. It eliminates that. I talked a little bit about school improvement, definition of struggling schools, tiered identification and support, which is what I think we've advocated for in the past. And then the support, really prioritizing those services that are intentional wraparound services in the large urban areas that we know from 15 years of admiring the problem that they're struggling with. So, and then the definition of evidence-based, we talked a little bit about the title funds and special populations that are now part of AYP. So they are trying to work with stakeholders right now. We're trying to get into those more tactical conversations. They're going to try and have a draft plan available online for at least 30 days once they develop it. So getting stakeholder feedback. If there's one thing that was loud and clear is they got the message that we wanted them to slow down. In their original presentation to the State Board of Education, they said that they were going to have their plan ready by June 30th. Now they're saying they're giving themselves a whole nother year. So that's a good thing. I think that was a good advocacy approach from all of the General Assembly members, State Board members, and the field, working in conjunction to push on ODE. I think one other thing that I would reference is the fact that right now we have an interim state superintendent. And so we're doing this, I hate to say it, in a vacuum of leadership. But sometimes that vacuum might provide more flexibility and opportunity because somebody from another legislative branch might not be dictating what is being done. So communications, website, emails, updates, webinar meetings, and anybody can go on to this ESSA at education.ohio.gov and be linked into updates. So really, I wanted to provide you this, I call this a 60,000 foot view of ESSA because we are going to have to make it 30,000, then 10,000 in the future for Granville schools. So I wanted to start the conversation now so that we can continue to talk about it over the next year and a half. Other thoughts, questions? I bored you to death. Trust me, I was sitting in your seat last week. So with that, I'm going to pull up Mr. Durst's presentation here, and we'll go ahead and switch gears. Mr. Durst did tweak his ankle playing basketball. So he has his nice New Balance shoes on. Looks like they are just being broken in. But
one of the best introductions I've ever had.
yeah. So let's see here. Where is play? And I'm not sure if this is. Oh, I can see it. Okay.
Well, since January, there's been a group of folks that have been working through really some different policy revisions in regards to the extracurricular handbook, but then I've also kind of expanded that work to include a look at current substance abuse policy as it relates to extracurriculars. I want to quickly list off the names of the folks who've been gathered working on this different work. They've really dived in head first because we've asked them to be very well read on these topics and to really speak from an educated standpoint. So Jay Snyder is in attendance tonight. Kevin Jarrett is also in attendance tonight, and there are also 6 others who had conflicts, unfortunately. Ms. Deeds sits on the committee, Sarah Sharp, Christy Charvat, Vince Galoni, Dusty Grimm, and then Ava Kunar is our student rep on the committee as well. So really the task that were handed to us were twofold. The first was to take a look at the current extracurricular handbook to determine possible revisions. And that's really just a matter of practice. That's something that we do on a semi-regular basis where you put a handbook or a guiding document in front of constituents and you really measure current practices with what is written in current policy. And you really do whatever work is needed to marry the two things. We expanded outside of that, and we also took a look at 5 or 6 other districts. We looked at their extracurricular handbooks so that we could see, is there something glaring that we're missing that they've included? And would it make sense, would it be prudent for us to include it in ours as well? So that really was a process where we did a lot of the reading in advance. We took advantage of some time over winter break to do some of that reading. And then when we came together for the first meeting in January, we really came together with that first focus of let's go ahead and hash out the handbook pieces themselves, kind of check that off the list in January, and then we were on to the second task. The second task was investigating the viability of random student drug testing at Granville. Specifically, we looked at 2 different things. We looked at mandatory drug testing and we looked at opt-in drug testing. But as a committee, I think that we all arrived at the same conclusion. And the conclusion really turned into the driving question. So it became a bigger situation than just what about student drug testing? And it really turned into how do we decrease the use of substances amongst the student population here in Granville? When we look at Pride survey results from last year, we see that about 51% of seniors had consumed alcohol in the previous 30 days. That's not something we're proud of. And so that's something that we see as an issue for our students in our schools. We are not alone in this. I want to assure you of that, that this is not only a Granville issue, this is a county issue, it's a state issue, it's a national issue. So we're not the first group to get together to try to figure out how to reduce this number in a school district. But this really became the driving question that focused a lot of the efforts that we undertook. Once we arrived at this driving question, we started to take a look very specifically at mandatory student drug testing. And the question that accompanied that reading was, is this something that could move the needle for us? So again, how viable is this in assisting us with this driving question? The most accurate way to explain the research in one statement is the research is split. And what we found as we read through both sides of this topic was that there are points and counterpoints to each side and each stance. When we got together in February, we actually sat down and we articulated every argument that we could identify that supported the implementation of mandatory student drug testing. We also articulated everything we could find to counteract those comments. It is no secret to anyone in this room that we live in a very educated community and that this is a sensitive topic. And so we wanted to be able to vet this idea extremely well before it moved outside of our committee, before we did any communicating to anyone about this. So what I've done, I have not listed an exhaustive bullet-pointed list of items for either side. I've grabbed the main supporting points, but also the main points of concern as it relates to mandatory testing. So let's quickly walk through the supporting points. There is research that points to the reduction in the use of substances during the period of testing. And by during the period of testing, what I mean is if a school has done this for 3 years and they knew their data coming in and then they measured themselves going out, that there was a move in the correct direction during the testing period. It does provide an opportunity for early intervention. A lot of this depends on how you structure the consequences that are associated with the testing. So if a student fails a test, if they test positive for some type of substance abuse, you could put a district in a situation where it's a non-punitive first consequence. And so you could seek out chemical dependency counseling or some form of treatment. The whole idea being intervene before a behavior becomes more than a once behavior, but a chronic behavior. You can attach positive consequences to this. If students test negative, you can reward them. That's a real big component of one of the Drug-Free Clubs of America systems that I'll talk about later. You can apply a testing to a range of students. So at the Supreme Court level, they upheld the constitutionality of student drug testing because you can do it for what they refer to as competitive extracurriculars. So that's any extracurricular that is competitive in nature. Basically, is there a tryout process for this extracurricular? The unmeasured stat up there is the last one. It provides students a reason to say no to substance use. If I'm at a party on Saturday and I know I could get tested on Monday, is that a reason for me to be able to say no to potentially using? However, there are definite counterpoints when we're really looking at the way that this is applied. It is not cheap. Depending on the sophistication of the drug panel that you use, you could be looking at $30, $40 per test, per student. If you come in and you test 850 students right off the bat, we can all start to do the math in our heads. It is costly in terms of finances, and it's costly in terms of resources as well. The second is, for me, the second is one of the biggest concerns. The drug panel will never test for all substances. It's just impossible. Based on the fact that people are sitting in a lab manufacturing something right now that students will use in 10 years. It's not possible to find an exhaustive panel that tests for everything that our students could or would use. Of equal concern, we did read a study that pointed to the increase in illicit drug use or untested drugs because the students identified that they were untested. And again, we don't want to bring something into this district with a great intent and a great motive of reducing use and then see something like this happen. That's the farthest thing from what we want. And the final point, with alcohol being the most abused substance for our student population, unfortunately, the people that are in favor of student drug testing come to see quickly that on average, and this is on average, that alcohol remains in your system for approximately 72 hours. So there are clear limitations with our ability to test accurately for student use of alcohol through a random drug testing policy and procedure. I apologize for the font on this one, that was not intentional. As we started to dig deeper and we expanded our research to include opt-in systems, the first that came to mind was Drug-Free Clubs of America. So Drug-Free Clubs of America has got a very heavy presence, specifically in Fairfield County. Tyler's Light is an organization that's run by Wayne Campbell out of Fairfield County, and they have got a supportive role for the Drug-Free Clubs of America, or DFCA, in the two Pickerington high schools, Pickerington North, Pickerington Central. The way Drug-Free Clubs of America works is that students pay a membership fee to join. It's a student-generated, student opt-in drug testing. The membership fee is something like $64. In Pickerington, Tyler's Light offsets the cost so that it's $20 per student. The membership opts the students in for random drug testing. So if I'm a member of Drug-Free Clubs of America, that membership fee, I understand that I have chosen now to put my name into the hat and I could get drawn for a random drug test. The membership provides community and school-based incentives. So what Drug-Free Clubs of America really attempts to do is they want to reward and bring to light all of the students who are doing the correct thing. So they're incentivizing the process. They do this by breaking it down through community rewards and school-based rewards. I think most of us are familiar with little reward cards that Little League sell and booster groups sell, and maybe it's going to get you 10% off at Jimmy John's, and it's going to get you half off at Chipotle. We would seek out community reward sponsors that would incentivize the program for our students. But they also do school-based incentives. One of the examples from Pickerington, they painted 5 student parking spots purple. We would paint them blue. And they're the best ones in the lot. And so on a monthly basis, we're raffling off those 5 spots, but we're only going to raffle them to Drug-Free Clubs of America membership students. Again, it's a way to incentivize and make public the decisions students have made to really choose to live drug-free. The concern that the committee had with Drug-Free Clubs of America is that the net, or the spread of influence, we're assuming, we don't know this, but we're assuming it would start in a much smaller place versus a mandatory program. We've got roughly 90% of our students who are involved in extracurriculars. So if you go with a mandatory route, then you've got a 90% reach. Drug-Free Clubs of America starts with something, and again, this is just what they are telling us. I'm not saying this would be the case in Granville. We could start with 50% for all I know. Generally speaking, they want you to be at 10 to 15% of your student participation in that first year, and then it grows steadily year after year. We are unfortunately playing a lot of phone tag with DFCA right now. We're looking for exemplar schools, maybe 5 or 6 years in, because we want to know what they have grown that pool to. What percent of the student body have they grown it to? But then also, what level of sophistication is their drug panel at? The other interesting thing with DFCA is that when the drug test is given, the results are never shared with the school. The results are communicated directly and solely with the parents. So it's the responsibility of the parents at that point, if there's a negative test, to remove all of the incentives from the students. So think of that membership card, and if there's a parking situation, anything that would be connected, that will be directed by the parent. So there's a significant difference there. You can speak to confidentiality concerns that erases confidentiality concerns. So there are many kind of dueling topics or threads of conversation through each of these different avenues. At the end of the day, we honestly see value in both. We've got concerns about both. We see value in both. And I think one of the things that we're very, very aware of is that we don't want this to be a divisive topic in our community. And it's one that deserves attention, and it's one that needs to be put in front of as many constituents as possible before any type of a decision or direction is dictated or indicated. That said, we do feel very compelled that as a district, we need to take a leadership role in this area, because 51% is, in my opinion, far too high of a number. Again, I want to thank the committee folks, because they have really spent a lot of time and a lot of hours really digging into the research behind this. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. I know Kevin and Jay would also be happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Matt. We're going to let them go into board discussion and talk a little bit more intentionally about your position and what you've communicated. I just want to bring you back to the board conversation that we've had for several years about the enforcement of our current policies, the perception that we're soft, so to speak, on some of the enforcement, and that's probably more due to the fact that all this information is privileged information, it's sensitive, it's not communicated widely. So when a kid does get in trouble for violating our substance abuse policy, we do not tar and feather them and walk them out into the school population and say, look what they've done. It's a very sensitive process. But I think we do have indicators in survey results that, and anecdotal, all of us do, of things that take place within Granville, not necessarily within the schools, that are detrimental to our students' health and welfare. So I know it's been a topic of board discussion in the past, and so given what you've heard tonight, I'd just like to get your perspectives with the notion that no decision is going to be made tonight, and we're probably going to have 2 or 3 board conversations and maybe a community-wide forum before we ever take a position or stance. But I think you have some level of commitment to do something different. And I think we have the ability to shape that with the information from the committee. And you can also, through your discussion, give me an indication if you want them to do additional research. They are a working committee. So if you're interested in certain things through your board discussion, just direct me to turn around and direct the committee to follow those pursuits. Okay? So with that, I'll turn it over to the board to discuss.
Sure.
Anybody can start?
I guess I'm happy to. Thank you, Mr. Durst, Mr. Snyder, Mr. Jarrett, all the folks on the committee. I know there's a lot to consider, and I fully appreciate that there's a lot of conflicting research and views out there. I guess I would say I'd skip to the last point you made, which is I think we feel compelled to lead because we're dealing with youth. And so the pride surveys are indicative of an area for concern. Anecdotal evidence is indicative of an area of concern. National surveys on the types of challenges that our kids are facing is reason enough that I think I believe firmly that some action is needed, and I don't sit here and tell you that I know exactly what that is. I know you've considered mandatory. I know you've considered opt-in. And I understand the pros and cons on each side. I also understand, and I hadn't really thought of it before, but your discussion really elucidated the issue about the fact that there is no comprehensive test out there now that tests for everything that we might want to test for. And I guess, we should know that because we see it in the world of international athletics when tests are put in place for one substance and then something else comes up. So it's an issue. If I may impose on you, I guess I would be interested in knowing what the perspective of the committee is about what we should try and test for or shouldn't. And understanding that that's probably a moving target. Alcohol is obviously, from the Pride surveys, a concern. What other things should we be looking at? And, and I'm rambling a bit here, I apologize. It seems to me we at some point are going to have to gain the support of the community, of parents in particular, if this is to be effective, or is to be optimally effective. I know we all struggle with trying to figure out where that line is, where our responsibilities stop as an educational body and where it becomes responsibility of parents or someone else, and we don't want to cross that line, and we don't feel like we want to be the policeman for the community. And so the other thing I would ask you to look at is maybe the focus from, in my view only, I don't know what others think, maybe the focus is what do we do if we're coming at this from a position of ensuring that we're doing everything possible to provide a safe environment, and especially as it respects extracurriculars, we're doing everything possible to educate and deter. I've said it before, I know it's a little bit of semantics. I'd love to see this called the substance abuse prevention policy instead of the substance abuse policy. But prevention is the key here. And fear of being caught has one element there, but I know there are other more significant pieces. And I know there are folks in the community who've been really great about helping me understand that. So where do we draw the line? The other area that I would look at, and in particular, I suppose it relates more to athletics perhaps than anything else. When we first talk about substance abuse, it seems to me we're talking about alcohol and perhaps narcotics, but performance-enhancing drugs are also an issue. And that's a safety issue for not only for the participants who are using them, but the participants who are competing against those who are using it. I don't know what we do about that, and I'd love to hear the perspective of the committee on that. And I'll stop because I could go on for a while, but I'll stop and let others talk.
Yeah. I guess I've been a strong supporter of looking at our policy and making a change, right? But I was uncomfortable before because I didn't think we really sort of had the background or the community support. So I think this committee has been fantastic to do that. And I think, like Russ said, we've really got to get a lot of voices out. And I like the idea of a community forum or something along those lines to vet the ideas that we have. And I think the other thing that I've really struggled with is I don't think you can implement a policy to change a culture, right? What we really want is a culture change, right? And so I like the driving question that the committee developed in framing it around that, right? Because I don't think it's a matter of like us changing the number of weeks or games you miss or whatever, right? I don't think that's really what moves the needle. And so to that extent, it's great that we have some other options, like this, Drug-Free Clubs of America. I think that's an interesting one to consider, and maybe that can be blended somehow with other testing models or something like that. I think that's one that leaves a lot to the families and the parents to be able to implement what they need to with the results of it. I'm not
I'd be curious with, like you said, talking to some of the other districts about, best practices, and is it really effective at all? Or is that model of feedback not effective? But if there's something that we can do to raise visibility, I think that's the key, because the culture change will happen when the visibility changes. And I'm not sure if it's just parking spaces or more, right? But I would like to see, a strong majority of our district students try and opt into a model like that, maybe instead of an alternative, which is the mandatory testing, which could have worse consequences if there's a school involved in it and so forth. But I think that maybe there's a way to kind of come up with some creative model that fits us, so that it respects the desires of the family, but at the same time has the teeth, if you will, to be able to help us move the culture. Right? So I think it's great that this committee started forth. I wish I had more community input, but I think that this is the right way to start, and getting it out there more broadly, and getting that kind of feedback is really a positive one, and maybe just making a couple potential proposals for different options, right, is a way to get that feedback, to kind of force the hand of the folks to look at it and read the article and stop by the meeting and things like that. Propose the ends of the spectrum, right, and see what we get. Because I just have not heard much feedback myself on this, because I think we haven't made any firm proposals. And once you do make a firm proposal, maybe that's the time that you get it, right? And hopefully you get it then, instead of after you implement a different policy.
Right.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Sure, and I apologize, I'm new to the conversation, so if this has been dealt with. But my question would be, as far as like an opt-in policy, who is the target that you're going for? Because I think that the habitual users, the everyday, twice a week, 3 times a week kids aren't going to join and aren't going to do the opt-in. So are you attacking trying to limit the recreational use within the student body, or are you trying to get those kids that really need the help but aren't going to opt in because they know that they're going to get caught? And what are the policies in place to help those kids who will not come and opt in? So that would be my only question about how far are you going out if you decide to do an opt-in.
Right. I think some of the conversation has been around starting young, like 7th graders, with the opt-in, where, I think it's more widely accepted that they want to be substance abuse free, and then building upon that. And I think that's what you heard from the DCA approaches. You want that to go from 10 to 15 to above and beyond. But I think you're right. The kids that are potentially in 11th and 12th grade that are already chronic users or habitual users, the likelihood of them saying, you know what, I'm going to opt in, is probably slim to none. And so we have to have some thought as to that perspective as well. And so that's a good
And those
point.
kids are probably the ones, I watch a lot of intervention, so it only comes from there. But those kids are probably the ones that are providing for the lighter user kids in the school district. So it's really targeting where the stuff is coming into the school that can help the kids.
One of the concerns that's been expressed to me is that, kids make mistakes. And if you're not a habitual user and you happen to have, made the mistake of going to a party one night and you have a drink and you get tested, and, to what extent does that, sort of ruin your future? And so that's been a concern that's been expressed to me. How do we, take that into consideration? And that's why I kind of like the idea that when testing is done, it goes right to the parents. It doesn't go through the schools, and that might alleviate some of that concern that's been expressed to me. Other people have also expressed, is it really the school's responsibility to be policing this? And I'm not saying I say one way or the other what it is, but it's just a concern of those who are on one side of the discussion. But then again, I also sit on the whole child committee, and there's plenty of parents on that committee who are very strongly, for doing something, and mandatory probably more than anything else. But now also other perspectives have come in, and so this is the committee's great that you researched a lot of the sides of the discussion, so that we actually have all of the facts, and I think that will be necessary when we go to have a community forum on it.
I think it's pretty clear from most of the board comments thus far that either approach, the orientation is going to be prevention. and education. And I think that's clear.
Not punitive.
Not punitive initially, to try and address that first concern of kids do make mistakes. And honestly, we want them learning in high school before it's truly a mistake that impacts the rest of their lives. Although some mistakes can be fatal. And so that's just the reality of the situation. But I think it's clear that no matter what, mandatory and or opt-in, the goal is to get students help. And but what's the best vehicle to get that help is, I think, a challenging question.
One other question I had for the committee is, and came up as a concern, that, we don't have a panel that tests for everything. And do we actually have to announce what the panel is? Can you say, are there other, can you say these are the range of things that we will test for and not necessarily say specifically what we'll test for, so therefore students wouldn't necessarily know?
Yeah, this is going to sound sneaky, but the fun thing is that it's our policy.
Right.
And so we develop our policy as we see fit. So if we want to publicize every drug under the sun and then select those that we test for, that's our ability to do that. I think we've seen it done both ways. We've seen it done where none of the tested drugs are announced, or more than the tested drugs are actually announced, or the actually tested drugs are announced. Unfortunately, it's like college admissions, like there's no standard answer.
Right, but any evidence to say one way or the other? I just, because you say you're always concerned that, okay, so if the kids know what we're testing for, then they'll just do something else, or that might lead them to do something else. That was just one I know in our committee that came up.
One of the fun anecdotes that came up, actually, and this is just, off the wall, of course, was in some of my research, I found a couple of kids in Kentucky that one had died from drinking a mixture of it was racing fuel and Mountain Dew. Yeah. So there is no panel for that.
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
But, obviously, broader you can make it look.
From my vantage point, one question I'd be curious about is, one of the goals from a mandatory perspective was that students have the ability to say, hey, I might be at risk for random drug testing. And do we have any knowledge from the opt-in model if kids still use that excuse and it can be a fallback position still within that opt-in model, that, hey, I've opted in, therefore I'm not going to participate. Because I think that is a huge piece in this culture because we have very bright kids. They get it. They make mistakes, but in general, you don't have kids that don't understand the broader perspective. So I think we can appeal to that in whatever policy we put in place or any system that we put in place. So they do tend to get the messages from their parents that college is important, that we expect them to be leaders. All of those messages, I think we could tie in, kind of going back to your culture piece. But I'd wonder if DCA has any research on, students reporting that as a rebuttal or an excuse. The other thing is in any situation, it's true with adult change of behavior. Sometimes you have to get compliance before you get to commitment.
Sure.
And I think that's a cultural change as well. And so sometimes you want to force the issue, and then people understand that it's better for the aggregate afterwards. I'm not sure that that's the right approach in this situation. And commitment might lead to broader commitment from an opt-in model. So, just another commentary.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious about whether the issues that we have with substance abuse are due to family acceptance or whether they're due to family ignorance, right? And I think a part of culture change and a part of what's effective with substance abuse mitigation is the communication aspect, right? I think there's a lot of people and families that don't talk about it. right? And that's a kind of a key to failure, right? And I think the more that we can do to create visibility of the issue, right, the more it will start those conversations that are very difficult conversations for many parents to have and things, right? And so anything that we can do that just raises visibility, right, even the opt-in thing or anything, right, I think it just helps us a lot along those lines.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
One of the measures that comes up whenever we administer the Pride Survey is student perception of parent disapproval. So if a student perceives that his or her parents would not approve of the substance abuse, that is one of those powerful protective factors that Jeff was talking about earlier. By and large, our students have got the correct perception. They see that their parents would not approve of them using. They're still choosing to use. But in terms of that parent disapproval piece, we're really in a very good spot there. School culture piece, we look at the exit surveys at the whole child committee level, and we've got very positive school culture across the district. We don't ask a question that says, is there a positive school climate in your building? A third grader doesn't understand that. A sixth grader doesn't understand that. But there are questions that are built in, like, I feel physically safe. I feel emotionally safe. My teachers care about me. 9 out of 10 students every year is answering those in a positive way. So we've got positive climate. We've got the correct messages being communicated from parents to students in regards to use. Unfortunately, as the committee kind of came to this conclusion, we still have this issue, though, that we need to tackle.
So take that one step further. How many parents in the community are aware that 51% of the seniors said they've used alcohol in the last? How many do you think would be? I'm curious. My sense is that a number of parents would be surprised by that. I don't know what that number is, but anyway, Jay, I'm sorry.
I think you're right. And of course, that's just, I don't think we have any way of measuring that. The thing that I would say is the counterpoint to the really positive numbers in the Pride surveys regarding parent perception is there's an additional question that follows immediately, which is peer perception. What do you think your peers would think of you using alcohol or marijuana? Which are the two, by the way, that sort of rise above the baseline. Thankfully, and obviously one of the things we want to think about is preventative measures to make sure that it never gets worse, but things like heroin and prescription drugs don't really rise way up on the scale here, but obviously we want to take care of that going forward. But on the peer approval side, the numbers are a lot different. They're actually, the perception of whether peers would approve of the use of alcohol and marijuana declines dramatically from 9th to 12th grade. So, one of my advocacies and one of the things I said is that, I feel like that is a good indicator for the FCA, for instance, because, if you've got an opt-in model that is showing off the benefits of opting out, of not participating, then that hopefully would drive that number up.
So I'm going to try and summarize this because I think the goal is to bring you back. But I think if you could maybe add some salient points from the Pride survey into the next presentation, and I know Craig McDonald couldn't be here from the Sentinel, but he said he would like your presentation and he was going to call me tomorrow. And I do want to start getting more information out into the news media about this because I do think that right now, not a lot of people understand that we're having a conversation. Right. And I think we need to get that public piece out there. But I think, when you come back at the April board meeting, I'd like to have some of that Pride survey that really is directive like Jay just suggested. It might lead us to a different blended approach.
Can I ask, one of the, sort of the historic perspective, one of the reasons we went down this path was when we started taking a look at the current policy and the penalties for violation of that, and I think there was a sense that we needed to beef up the deterrent effect. I know you probably haven't gotten to that. Is it your intent, is the committee also intending to work on that issue, or is that something you think is a follow-on, perhaps a different group? Or I just don't know where you think this.
I'm not sure that, I think the conversations that have taken place, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, have been if there is a mandatory process in place that people felt actually more comfortable with stiffer penalties, because it's widely known that there's a mandatory process and you're opting in. I don't know that the group has talked about the actual policy implications with an opt-in.
And that's fine. I'm not suggesting that you should.
Also, just to clarify, I think it was mostly consensus that we really we see the value in a student participating in the extracurricular.
Mm-hmm.
And so way down the road, if something like this does come into existence, it was almost unanimous. And we have very different opinions on the committee. It was intentionally done that way. But it was nearly unanimous that we did not want a reduction in participation for that first offense, because we don't want to lose them from the activity. We want to keep them in the activity. That's a protective factor.
Right.
So let's attack it with a treatment plan so that they're still in the activity and they're getting the correction that they need. That was what we referred to as that early intervention.
Mm-hmm.
We want to help them figure this out before it's a chronic use situation. We didn't really move past that in terms of consequences.
Okay.
But it was almost consensus that we didn't want to start reducing participation with the first, or with the self-report.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Was this athletics driven, and because that's the largest swath of students that we can throw into one, and then just threw all the extracurriculars in just because, to be fair to athletes? Or was this
Well, I think it's always been extracurricular.
Okay, the entire.
And yeah, the entire umbrella. I think most people's minds go to athletics, but I think it's always been for us a conversation about extracurricular. As a matter of fact, Sarah Sharp is a drama teacher and she's involved in this process. So now the only thing that the board needs to understand is there's a bright line from the Supreme Court on you cannot cross it for co-curricular. So band is not something that we can, enforce a mandatory process because it does get a grade. So that is something that most people would go, well, why do they get a free pass if that's the approach that you wanted to take? But I think that's an important piece to note.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys have done you folks have done a lot of work. And I know there's a lot still to be done, and we're putting a lot of burden on you, but I think, we all think this is important to try and figure it out, and I don't think there's certainly any consensus yet on what the answers ought to be, but we all recognize the importance of it.
One other thing that I'd like to comment on, and this is my soapbox, but I think in an environment where we do not have a lot of role models, modeling the ability to have a civil discourse on a challenging topic. I think, Jay and some of the other people have had very productive conversations and dialogue about a sensitive topic that has not devolved into a personality issue that gets modeled sometimes on the evening news. And that ability to have civil dialogue about a challenging topic is something that all of our kids should witness and understand that's part of being an active citizen. And so beyond just whatever topic you're talking about, the fact that you're modeling that for everybody, I think is fantastic. And I'd like to continue to model that as we get into more of a public conversation about this. This is not personal, okay? This is about what we think is in the best interest of kids. So that's my editorial comment.
If I can.
And I have the, what?
Ava Kunar has been unbelievable as a student representative.
Yeah.
She's a sophomore in high school who speaks like a 25-year-old. She's really outstanding. So her participation has been
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
If I can thank Matt too for,
Yeah.
encouraging an open dialogue, encouraging dissenting opinion. A lot has been very productive as a result of the way he's handled the committee, and I appreciate being part of it.
Great, thank you.
And additionally, I also wanted to throw in the other thing that I think is a great preventative factor that Matt's been working on, which is the connection mapping. And I'm sure he's discussed that at other times, but I think that when you look at the sorts of things that actually do keep kids engaged and away from these sorts of substances, I think that's going to be as productive as well.
Connection mapping is a concept that he actually took from the intermediate school. And it's making sure that every kid is on somebody's radar. So you literally map your entire student population and who knows who, and down to every individual, which is a result of some of the survey data that they did several years ago. So again, to our point, don't just do it, do something about it with the information that you have. So thank you. Okay, do we want to close this discussion and move to public comment?
Anybody else have anything else to add at this point? Thank you. At this point in the meeting, we'd like to entertain public comments. If you'd like to address the board, please come to the podium, state your name and address, and speak up to 3 to 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Fred Wolf, 4588 Grandview Road, Granville, Ohio. I'm here to comment on the random drug testing. As a little bit of a background, I've been a volunteer middle school football coach in Granville for 14 years. I'm also the president of the Licking County Alcohol Prevention Program Board. I'm a member of the Common Police Court, Drug Court, Steering Committee, and Treatment Team, and I'm also the marketing director at Shepherd Hill, which is the drug and alcohol treatment facility that's a department of Licking Memorial Hospital. So, a couple things that I've heard is, we talked about commitment and compliance. One of the things I've found in my experience has been consequences are an important part of this. And it's not just to be punitive, but adults as well as children have to understand there's consequences for their actions. And in my opinion, consequences can be good or bad, but they need to understand there are consequences. And something that Mr. Janice hit on that really stuck out to me is as an educational body, whatever the board and the administration decides, education is a huge part of this. And you can have the discussion on when to start. I don't think 6th grade is too early to start. And I think, and there's facts that just came out. United Way just did a community blueprint that they've released to the public. The number one issue is drug and alcohol abuse, countywide. Number 6 is children's drug and alcohol abuse. So it's an issue that's there. And as some of the people that have been around United Way for a while, it's been there a long time. It hasn't changed in 10 or 20 years. So I like the idea of we're going to try to change the culture, but I think realistically set the bar very realistic on this. It's ongoing. As working in the profession, and also with personal experience, it is tough to change the whole attitude. There's moral models. There's lots of reasons why, especially when it comes to alcohol. Parents use it. It's a legal substance. Now, if you're not 21, I would humbly suggest that no matter what our kids are doing, they're breaking the law if they're not 21 using alcohol. So, but I guess my point being is there are also some outstanding services in this county that could help this committee. You've got LAP, you've got Shepherd Hill right there with We've been around since 1986. It's a nationally known facility that'd be happy to answer questions about drug testing. I mean, we drug test it at the drug court, you drug test at lab. I mean, there's lots of different things that all those entities would be happy to share their expertise at no cost. But they'd like to be, they're there, and I know would be welcome to add any questions, especially about drug testing. Because, in my opinion, they're never going to find a perfect drug test. We hear about, in the public, we hear about the heroin epidemic, and the state's getting behind it and all this great stuff. Well, all of a sudden, in drug court, we're not seeing heroin anymore. You're seeing, going back to crystal meth. So, it's great that they're addressing the heroin epidemic, but it's changing. It's constantly changing. So, it goes back to my premise about education. The more we talk about it and draw it out of the shadows, I think the better off our community is. We talk about bullying. I would like to see, personally like to see more talk about drugs and alcohol. I don't see how the education component of this would hurt anyone. Now, what's decided on testing, to me, it's almost a separate issue, but whatever you decide to do, I would really strongly recommend that education be a key component of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
By the way, you didn't say that you were also our booster president, athletic booster president. Yeah.
For life.
For life.
How's that work?
It's one of those badges of honor, right?
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yep.
Sorry, makes me think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Did you take some notes? Okay. At this point, board reports. I go first. I'm going to first.
Yes, you are. You can defer. You're the board president.
I am, but I will go first. I haven't done a CTEC update in a little while, so I have some sort of fun things to report about things that are happening with students at CTEC. First, Jeff, Matt, Durst, and I all attended the ceremony for the induction of the students into the National Technical Honor Society last week, and they inducted 85 students, which is the largest class they've had in, I think, ever, in part because they started doing juniors this year as well as seniors. And we had 2 Granville students, one in the electronic and computer technology program, and one in the digital design and interactive media program, both who are off to college next year. I don't know that they've decided yet where to go, but they will be going on to college. We have, there are 3 scholarships available in the skilled trades to move from CTEC into the adult education for graduating seniors. They're $30,000 each. It's the manufacturing and industrial skilled trade scholarship. So I hadn't known about those before. So Joyce just told us that those 3 scholarships are available, which is a good amount of money to go towards adult education. Students of the CTEC Visual Communications and Granville KAP Digital Design are working in collaboration with the Granville's Historical Society Museum to design and produce exhibit posters. The posters will inform the viewer and illustrate each of the individual exhibit areas. And last week, students met with the museum's board of managers and exhibit heads and viewed the exhibit space for which they are developing the posters. And they should go up first weekend of May. So that's a nice collaboration. Public
product.
Yeah, there you go. The VCA Senior Art Show is actually going to be hosted here in Granville at Art 43023 Gallery on Broadway, and that's on May 6th from 6 to 8 p.m., and the show will be up for an extra 10 days after that. We had middle school students participate in the STEM Fest at the Works this year. So it went down, usually it's high school students, but it went down into students from health careers and pre-engineering at Heath, from Heath, and I guess it's just Heath. And they participated in the water filtration and toothpick bridge competition. CTEC had 23 students, high school students, participate in the STEM Fest, and they had a first place team of 4 members in the bridge design, and each one got a $1,000 scholarship. And they weren't our students, but I thought that was kind of exciting. And then what's coming up in the future is lots of Skills USA, which is their student organization competitions coming up. One of our students who's in the electronic and computer technology program is going to nationals, I think he said, right, in April. So lots of just good student things happening.
On Sunday, I went to the Zonta Awards over at Worthington Hills, and Emily Haynes from Watkins Memorial, who walked across the stage, the plastics engineer. Do you remember her? She won an award. Elise Morrison from Granville High School also won the award. So I was there for her, and I recognized Emily from CTech.
Yeah.
So it's great recognitions.
I heard we have a good class next year going to CTech. Do we have the numbers yet, or do we know how many students will be going there?
We have the super secret lowdown numbers because they just emailed them to us today, but they ask us not to reveal anything because they're mailing, snail mail, they're mailing things to the students this week. But it's a nice class.
Great. Excellent.
Okay. Anybody have any?
No, it's good.
Okay.
We have not had a GEF meeting since our last board meeting, so I don't think
Thursday.
there's much
Yeah.
updates. It's this Thursday, but things are going well with the GEF.
Cheryl Walker from the Aspire, were you on that? You were on that email.
Mhm.
Yeah, just, things seem to be moving forward smoothly with the collaboration between Aspire and GEF, which I thought was exciting.
Yes.
Has that been communicated at all to staff or more broadly or things like that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Because I think it's still in the
Yeah.
same, it doesn't really
It's-
start.
It's not going to
until next year.
transition until next year.
So, but that's
Great.
exciting,
Yeah,
that's, happy that's moving forward. Andrew, you want to
The
give
art
us an
forum,
update?
yeah, it was good. It was a brand new. There were about 50 people there. Jeff was there. And I think it quickly moved from a Granville art forum to a Licking County art forum, realizing that art does not recognize boundary places as we go forward. But the bulk of the time was spent in small groups, and people were tasked with coming up with probably 3 to 4 of the biggest issues, I guess, people saw with art in our areas. And I think the resounding one with each group when they came back was that there's a lot of great stuff going on, but there's no central hub to find out about that. So it was a good first meeting. I got to talk to our teachers, and they are wonderful, passionate people. It was exciting to meet them. But there will be steps forward, and hopefully they'll get down to nitty gritty about helping kids. It was just very much from the 30,000 view kind of discussion, but it was good. A good first step.
Is there going to be another meeting, or is
There is. You could sign up for it. We haven't heard.
To be determined.
To be determined, yeah.
Haven't heard back.
Was that one of the outcomes then?
Yeah, that there are going to be committees that we're going to set up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think, to Andrew's point, and we have a lot of art expertise in Granville. The executive director of the Columbus Museum of Art is a Granville resident. Dan Cantona lives on North Granger Street. He is the executive director for the Ohio Arts Council. Neil Zimmer is a board member of the Ohio Arts Council. All of these people were in this meeting, and you're thinking, wow, didn't know we had all these people in Granville doing these things. So I think part of it was just people not knowing what other people did. So it was good. It's great. Yeah.
Thanks for being there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fun.
Good. Cool. Action agenda?
All right. So I'm happy to recommend the Granville Community Foundation Grant Award of $10,000.
So moved.
Second.
So Mr. Bernath put together a grant that is really helping to fund the professional development of PBL for next year. And Mike added a little bit to the document. I think the end of the grant was 164 pages, I think, or close to that, because Mike's financials were in there. But I think it is another example of living in a supportive community. And the fact that they're supporting our professional development around project-based learning is fantastic. And you start to hear more and more examples of what our kids are doing, and you start to listen for, those public products, those public displays, those take action projects that are really, really adding value to our community. That art display will be fantastic, or that visual display. So we're excited, and we thank you very much to the Granville Community Foundation.
Any questions or comments?
No.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Genese.
Aye.
Mr. Cohen.
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
Thank you. 11.02 is our representative for the Village Planning Commission.
So moved.
And second.
Second.
Okay. And Carl Jennings has a pretty impressive resume as far as work in the planning fields, not only from an architectural perspective, but also from an economic development perspective. So we're excited that he's going to represent us on that committee as an ex officio. However, if history rings true, he'll be a voting member before we know it. So.
Very good. Any questions? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Cohen.
Aye.
Mr. Genese.
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
Thank you. 11.03 is a contracted service for hearing impaired services.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any questions?
No.
Any comments?
No.
Go ahead.
Because the first contract is going on maternity.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So this is a maternity leave refresh of the contract.
Thank you. Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Genese.
Aye.
Mr. Cohen.
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
Okay, we have a 11.04, a leave of absence.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? Do you have any? Okay. Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Cohen.
Aye.
Mr. Genese.
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
Thank you. Next is an unpaid leave of absence.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any-
No comment.
No? No questions? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Cohen.
Aye.
Mr. Genese.
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
The next item, 11.06.
So moved.
You might see the biggest smile in the room, Glenn. So I hear a so moved by Mr. Miller.
I'll second.
All right. And so I just want to highlight the fact that Mr. Thompson actually was an employee here 5 years ago as well, and then went to higher ed and is now coming back. And we're very excited to have an additional person help us manage the day-to-day network infrastructure. Yes. Great.
And this is the position that's shared with the village?
This is the position that would provide support to the village.
Is
Yes.
that,
If we want to continue that pattern.
Okay.
Right now, we have a laundry list
Oh,
of
I'm
things that
sure.
need to be
Yeah.
fixed
Right.
first.
Right, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to. Any other questions?
No.
You're good? All right, take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Genese.
Aye.
Mr. Cohen.
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
Thank you. 11.07 is the resolution for the sale of the modular unit that is currently the bus garage.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so we have to sell it for $1, and really they're saving us about $10,000 for the removal fees. So it is a dilapidated modular unit, and we're glad to get rid of it.
Great.
Any questions or comments?
No. Good result.
Yeah.
Good riddance. Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Genese.
Aye.
Mr. Cohen.
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
Okay, the next 11.08 is an overnight field trip. Our Latin students are going to be traveling to Italy next summer in 2017.
So moved with great envy.
Yes.
Sounds like a good trip.
You have a second?
A second.
Board chaperones needed? No? Oh,
Hey,
okay.
I'm sure there are.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Janice.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 11.09 is the extension amendment for the sports medicine services through OSU.
So moved.
Second?
Second. Just a comment, Bree Miller performs our athletic training services through OSU, and Dr. Tim Miller provides the medical services pro bono. And we pay for Bree's services, but because we have so many sports and she is stretched pretty thin between different fields, we had a conversation with OSU about adding services, and they're actually giving us a really good deal for $1,200 additional dollars. We're getting a part-time person. I mean, 12,000, not 1,200. I wish it was 12.
It's a better deal.
Yeah, but this is an ongoing relationship with Ohio State University, and they've done a fantastic job for us. And Bree is fantastic.
Yeah. I think it's great news. You're right, I don't see, with all the participants we have out there on any given day and all the fields that they're on, it's a lot for her to cover.
And then you have some high school principals that come in hobbling, and, you know, I mean, it's all of our athletes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No?
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Janice.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Okay, and then the amendment is 11.10 is the creation of the Laura Salkow cheerleading scholarship.
So moved. Second.
Okay, and this is, I believe, a $500 scholarship that will be given annually to a designated senior cheerleader.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about the late notice, but this just came up and they're actually trying to give the award tonight at the basketball banquet. So we put it on at the last minute to create the scholarship. The Salkow family will be funding the scholarship
Great.
on the district's behalf.
It's very nice of them.
Yes.
You have a description of it.
Mhm.
Everyone has a
Yeah.
description of it.
Great. Any other questions?
Can I, just for scholarships in general, do we like require like a 10-year that we know there's money for every year for like how do we know that
What
it'll
we'll
be
do,
funded
yeah,
every year?
what we'll do is we'll actually work with them. Sometimes we manage the scholarships. Sometimes we'll outsource it to the Licking County Foundation. Sometimes it's the Granville Education Foundation. I think my goal is to try and get them all into the Licking County Foundation because they have the staff to facilitate the scholarship application process. But yes, they typically have a threshold of like a 5-year payout. And if the balance drops below, then the amount of the scholarship starts to change. Yep.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Janice.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Thank you. Next is our consent agenda, 12.01, A through C, 4.
Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, I'd like to call attention to a couple of things. First is, you'll see a resignation of Pam Stewart, head softball coach, but she's not actually resigning. She's actually just changing her contract to .98 and then delegating .2 of that paid position to a previous volunteer because the numbers in softball have grown. So we wanted to have another paid coach. So that is reflected in the supplemental approval on page 4. The other 2 resignations, one is a resignation, the other is for retirement purposes. Molly Gardner, GHS English teacher. Molly was a student at Granville High School and has been a teacher there for several years, and we can definitely say with appreciation of service that we appreciate everything that Molly has done for us over the last several years. And then Barb Helwig has been the face of the front office at the high school for many, many years. I'll never forget Gus Moore, the deputy sheriff at the for the county said, there's one lady that I'm afraid of in Licking County, and it's Barb Hellwig. She doesn't let anybody get past, not even if you're wearing a uniform. So we appreciate Barb's dedication to keeping everybody safe, and Barb is one of those people that know a lot of history in Granville, has a huge network, has been here a very long time, and we're hoping to keep her engaged in the schools in a different capacity from a volunteer perspective, and we appreciate everything that she's done for Granville schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I rely on her daily messages just to make sure
Yes.
what's going on.
Yes.
In what cases do we have to have volunteers paid a portion? I noticed with the softball thing, can you not have a volunteer
So
coach
that
that's blessed?
they have to be paid, I believe, for them to be able to be with the students unsupervised.
Unsupervised. So that requires them to get more of a pupil activity permit and some of the licensure things that our head coaches have to do.
Right.
So
So does that include like club supervisors and things as well? Or
Yeah.
other volunteers? Unless they're paid by the school district, they can't be.
They should not-
Should not be.
alone.
Supervised
Yes.
alone by them.
That's correct.
And that's a state law? Or that's a board policy? Or
That's a board policy that is supported by state law.
Okay. It just seems like we have a lot of volunteer coaches and things like that that come and help run with the kids at track, and I don't know what other kinds of things, and work with the various clubs and things like that, that occurs to me might not all be paid technically. And I don't know how we monitor that, or if there's.
I think we really rely on the head coaches to kind of monitor that situation and make sure that there's a paid supervisor there. But it's kind of like if you've ever gone through, a church function, they now have that, Keep Our Children Safe program. We want to have anybody that is unsupervised be a paid employee that has certain level of requirements of having that type of position.
I guess I'd
beyond
like to
just
see- yeah.
a simple background check, which
I guess I'd like to see a lot of our volunteers go through that rigor of that process or whatever, instead of having to force them to get paid or get in the mechanics of that to some extent, because there might be some baggage associated with that, and if there's ways that we can get.
all
people
of our
that otherwise might volunteer.
volunteers have a BCI check, correct?
Right.
Okay. So there is at least a certain level of coverage for the volunteers, but it's for them to assume a supervision role, they need to be a paid employee.
Right, because the additional checks are what exactly?
Well, they have to have a pupil activity permit.
Pupil activity permit, and that's another level of check of some sort? or what's
It's
that?
an application to the state. It's usually a 3-year license. They have to have other requirements to maintain their licensure or permit status.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No.
Roll, please.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Khan?
Okay.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
The
You're up.
treasurer's report?
Yeah.
So moved.
Oh, second. Yeah.
For yet another month in a row, it is a very quiet report. Still not a lot going on. The revenues do look a little better than normal right now. That's just because of where we are in the process of the collection of this first half settlement of property taxes. We've gotten the money a little faster than we were expecting from the county. That doesn't mean we're going to get more. It just means we're getting it faster. We actually have a much better idea probably by the end of the week. From my understanding, they're running the actual settlement overnight tonight. So we'll have a better final view of what it looks like. I'm not anticipating anything that looks abnormal. But right now, because of the property taxes, we're actually at a 7% growth year over year in revenue, but that will mostly go away by the end of this month. Expenditures are really right on target for the year. It's percent that we spent of what we're expecting, we're right on target with prior years. Spending is up 6.2%, but that is mostly anticipated. And then, as we've discussed before, most of the cause of that is in benefits and purchase services, primarily healthcare and services for students. Again, year-to-date revenues are 2.5% above estimate. That will again go away by the end of March. Expenditures continue to move back down towards the overall estimate as I've anticipated they would. They're now just 0.6% ahead of estimate. And again, I anticipate most of that going away by the end of the year, where we'll finish pretty much on target by the time we get out to June. Cash balances remain above our guidelines through the end of fiscal year 17. Combination of that and our almost $11 million cash balance that we have right now did allow me to invest another $1 million in CDs last week. I did them as 9-month CDs just because of the timing of when a lot of our CDs are maturing, and honestly because the interest rates have actually gotten worse. The year CDs, which we have been getting 1 to 1.05% on a year to 18 months, we're down to 0.7 to 0.75, and it was 0.55 for 9 months. So I just went ahead with the 9 months to keep the flow of them maturing, and we'll reevaluate it when those mature at the end of the year and see where the cash is and where the interest rates are. I really don't want to tie stuff up for long periods of time for 0.75%. It's just probably a bad choice of things to do. As the last page of the report, I did do an update on home sales within the district during 2015. These are not official numbers that I have for 2015. I derived them from downloading all of the sales data in Licking County of residential property during the year. The big things, 2004, if you look at 14, the numbers of sales that are on there were astronomical compared to history. I think what you saw, there was a huge release of the market finally after the steady decline in sales that occurred because of the housing market crash and the difficulty of people buying in Licking County because they were losing money elsewhere on their sales of homes. And I think there was a huge flood of built up demand in 14. Even though 15's numbers are really down quite a bit, you'll see especially in the township, still the 15 number is higher than any number other than 14 all the way back to 2005. And the village number is a little bit weaker than 2005, 6, and 7, but still not a bad number. The key thing to look at is you see the median sales prices. Those tend to be kind of unstable from year to year because it's really driven by what homes are selling. That's not an indication of what the market is. The indication of the market is the last column in there. Basically, if a percentage from one year to the next goes up, as it did in the township, that really is an indicator that prices have actually gone backwards a little bit. But again, that's not too surprising given from 13 to 14 they dropped by 10. You see the percentage drop from 93 to almost 84%. That equates to about almost a 9% increase in prices, in home prices. So the fact that it went the other way a little bit after a 9% increase is not surprising. The village, after being stable for a couple of years, is showing almost a 2.5% increase in prices in 15. And again, that's driving the drop in the ratio from 90.5 to a little over 88. The importance of those ratios, when Department of Taxation looks at the sexennial reappraisal, which will occur in Licking County next year, in 2017, they're going to want to see those ratios come into a 92 to 94% range. And when they're in the 80s like they are now, that means that prices have to be increased. For values for tax purposes have to be increased to bring them in line with sales prices. And so if we had no change in prices during 16 based on what we're looking at here, I'd expect about a 6% increase in residential values across the district at the reappraisal next year. If prices continue to go up a little bit this year, we could go up to 7 or 8%. I would suspect they will not go down as interest rates are still very favorable, and the economy still seems to be growing. So I think those are positive indicators for the housing market. So I'd throw that in there this time just as an update, since I was able to kind of put the data together.
Is there an enrollment implication of the number of sales, right? Does that track to the extent that there's more sales, there's more families moving in? Or
Surprisingly, last year not. We saw that and kind of expected it would be, and we really didn't get other than first grade.
Right.
We didn't get a huge, a bump in enrollment. Matter of fact, it was, it was actually lower than we would thought it'd be in net other than first grade. Now, whether that factored through into this year when we did get a bump of enrollment, and maybe a lot of the sales were still with families with the kids a year or two away from school.
Right.
And so maybe we are seeing some of that bump in this year's class because we have gone up by 30 kids from last year. And so, it's possible that we've seen a little bit. It's really the building that's starting again that's going to drive some of the kids. So, we're seeing some different things. One of the things I noticed in the sales that we got, the record of last week that I sent you, that Trinity Homes purchased 10 parcels last year, which is an indication they're planning. I assume they would not have purchased those parcels to develop if they weren't planning on building on them. And we've seen, a couple other areas up on North Street and down on 37 where we're starting to get some construction again. The 10 that I referenced, those are actually in is it Park Ridge?
Park Ridge.
In Park Ridge, which is laid dormant for
a long time,
years now at a lot of empty lots. So it looks like there might be a little bit more movement in that area as well right now.
Okay.
Any questions for Mike?
No.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Cohn?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye. At this point, we'd like to have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.